Welcome to this webinar on combating foreign government influence in American elections, both state and federal, a growing problem. I'm Jeff Clements, president of American Promise and a member of Leadership Now, and grateful to both organizations for bringing this conversation today to us. With Congressman Jared Golden, represents the 2nd District in Maine, and State Senator from Maine, Rick Bennett, a Republican. Congressman Golden is a Democrat. This is a cross-partisan problem and a cross-partisan solution. And I'm going to be turning it over to, in just a minute, to the president and co-founder of Leadership Now, Daniela Blue Ayers, and she'll be taking us from there. I do want to share my screen with you to share some slides, but just before I do, to set up this conversation, I want to recognize 2 Leadership Now members from the state of Maine who have helped to both move this needed response for our democracy forward in Maine and around the country, and brought this to Leadership Now for the discussion. Warren and Patrick, you guys there?
Yes, thanks, Jeff. And thank you all of you for joining. I think it's really exciting that we're having this conversation today about another way that Maine can help, in a bipartisan way, move the American democratic experiment forward. This is, I think, a great case study of how to do that. So thank you, Jeff, and everybody for joining.
Great.
And I'll just add that we at Leadership Now see Maine as a laboratory of democracy. Once again, Maine steps up to the plate. And I want to thank Senator Bennett, who I've been following your career for such a long time, and then Representative Golden, who I met last year in one of your outdoor fundraisers, and I think accosted you about Leadership Now to the point where we finally got you here. So I'm so pleased that you've joined us today.
Great, thank you, Patrick. Thanks, Warren. And we're going to get right to the Congressman, State Senator, and Daniela. But let me just tee up some slides about the focus of the problem, and then we'll hear a lot more from our guest and Daniela. I'm going to share my screen now and just walk us through some quick data points. So 2020, just 2 years ago, and we're now heading into 2022, we'll see something different. We had a $200 million Senate race in the state of Maine, the race for Susan Collins' seat. To get a scope of the velocity of money in the political system right now, compare that with 2010. The 5 most expensive Senate races in 2010 are barely visible on a bar graph showing the current state of affairs. The $200 million race in Maine did not make the top 5 most expensive races. It's not even on the chart. We are heading towards billion-dollar Senate races, where the money is coming from fewer sources and higher amounts, and with the super PAC, C4, and other phenomenon, often unknown sources, including foreign sources. From the Maine voter experience, David Trahan, Republican colleague of Senator Rick Bennett's in the state Senate, now running the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine, a hunting, fishing, and Second Amendment group, who actually has the ability to be heard in Maine's elections, to be sure, could not be heard in the $200 million race in 2020. He said it was like being under an avalanche where nobody could hear them and nobody could hear each other. What it's doing in Maine and in the country is tearing us apart. This is from Pew studies over decades. The collapse since 2010 of trust in our democracy process. Very few Americans now believe government is actually run for the country or Americans. Most now believe it's run for a few big interests and donors. Maine got a 2021 experience as well that is representative of the country, as was their 2020 Senate race, where foreign government money poured in the millions to influence a ballot initiative. We'll hear from Senator Bennett about that. Maine, as we all know, doesn't take kindly to outside interference, has an independent streak and a problem-solving streak. First state in the union to do ranked choice voting, usually responsive to problems ahead of the country. And that's the case here with the Protect Maine Elections ballot initiative to both take on the foreign government influence and the larger problem of out of control money in our political system. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to stop share, and I'm going to very happily introduce my friend Daniela to take it from here. As we all know, she's the CEO of Leadership Now Project, a membership organization of business and thought leaders taking action to strengthen American democracy. Daniela was a partner and director at Dahlberg, which she helped grow to a leading global group of social impact businesses, and spent 5 years in the Obama administration advising and working with Secretary of States Clinton and Kerry. Daniela, thank you so much for leading us in Leadership Now generally and in this conversation today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff, and thanks so much everyone for being here. Couldn't be a more timely topic, and I was really pleased to hear from Warren and Patrick earlier, two of Leadership Now members with strong, who are in Maine or with strong links to Maine, and they are really representative of the business leaders who are part of Leadership Now across the country and are really concerned with the erosion we see in the strength of our democracy and the ability for everyone's voices to be heard in the system and lead to outcomes that are seen as legitimate by Americans. I'm really thrilled to introduce both Congressman Golden and Senator Rick Bennett. Jared Golden represents the 2nd District of Maine. He serves on the Small Business Committee and the Armed Services Committee. He's also a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, where we know many of the members on both sides of the aisle who are working to find solutions. He was in the Marines. He was deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. And when we look at this issue, he's a co-sponsor of the Stop Foreign Funds in Elections Act that's been introduced in Congress, and is also a sponsor of the constitutional amendment that would reduce that. Of course, American Promise is a big supporter of, as are we, to really end the influence of money in elections. State Senator Rick Bennett is CEO of Value Edge Advisors, a firm he founded in 2014 that worked with institutional investors. So himself a business leader, and really, I think, a credible source to speak to the risks that this outside funding influence has in the state. He also, he was previously president of the Maine Senate, chair of the Maine Republican Party, and was reelected to the Senate in 2020. And he is now leading the Protect Maine Elections ballot initiative to stop foreign government influence in the state. So thanks to both of you for your leadership on this issue, and really interested, I think Patrick said earlier, really Maine, I think we always think of as a place that's very robust in terms of the strength of democracy and engagement of citizens across the state. So seeing this type of influence and distortion in the state, I think, is particularly in some ways surprising and disturbing. So I'd love to dig in a little bit about what's happening, what has happened in Maine, what these ballot initiatives and funding look like. I'll start with you, Senator Bennett. Can you say a little bit about the story behind foreign money influence in the state that we're talking about here? Oh, Senator, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. You know what?
No problem.
2 years of legislative session, mostly on Zoom, and that was like number 2 for me. So
no problem.
Thanks for the catch. I really appreciate Leadership Now digging into this issue in particular, and I appreciate American Promise and their leadership in this issue. And as you said earlier, Maine has got a terrific, I hate to say the term, but it's a case study in what can go wrong when we're not ever vigilant about money in politics, and particularly the dangers of foreign government involvement in our elections. We're really at a crossroads in Maine. And we saw in a recent referendum just how those dangers can manifest themselves. So there's a loophole exists in Maine law, in Maine's election law, that allowed in a referendum last year, a foreign government entity, actually Hydro-Quebec in this case, which is a crown corporation owned 100% by the province of Quebec, a foreign government. They're our neighbors, they're friendly neighbors, but in this particular case, they involved themselves directly in electioneering in a referendum before the people of Maine. Not only did they involve themselves, it was a record amount of money, $22 million they spent as part of a campaign that cost nearly $100 million, blowing all records off in Maine elections on a referendum campaign. And that sum was spent by a foreign government in our November 2nd election last year. So, regardless, this was an election involving an energy corridor coming from Hydro-Quebec to Massachusetts. Maine people collected 80,000 signatures to put this on the ballot. And the amount of money spent by Hydro-Quebec and also Iberdrola, which is a Spanish conglomerate, which has some foreign government ownership as well. Actually, the two largest owners of Iberdrola are the government of Qatar and the government of Norway. They together own over 10% of Iberdrola. Iberdrola was involved in the other vast amount of spending in that election. So it put a fine point on the question of how open our elections are to foreign entities and particularly to foreign governments in direct involvement in those elections. So, the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, ruled in July of last year that state ballot questions are not elections under federal law. And because of this, they don't enjoy the same protections as political candidates or political committees. And so foreign nationals are free to spend as much as they want to influence state referendums, unless the states themselves step up to protect themselves from this undue influence. So that's the context of the proposal that we are now collecting signatures for in Maine. We have an initiative called Protect Maine Elections. And I'm happy to talk about the details, but I wanted to first frame out the why this issue is of moment now in Maine. That election, by the way, the referendum is over, but it did expose this vulnerability that we're now trying to close.
Interesting. And how much are we seeing this elsewhere in other states? I'm interested either to the extent that you have those kind of benchmarks, and I'm assuming that Congressman Golden is also looking across.
Well, I'm happy to defer to Congressman Golden on this. I will tell you this, that when we were, the referendum actually comes out of a bill that I put forward in the Maine legislature this year. The bill, by the way, was overwhelmingly passed by bipartisan majorities in the House and the Senate. Unhappily, it was vetoed by our governor, I think largely because of concerns that it would maybe actually change the rules, if you will, in the middle of this referendum campaign. I was perfectly happy to change the rules. We should have, because we should have closed the loophole, but she was on the other side in the initiative, and that was the reason for the veto. So we took that bill and we've made it into this referendum, and we've also added on some other provisions I'll get into. But to answer your question, in process of researching that bill, our committee analysts learned that there are 26 states in the country that have direct initiative opportunities, and of those, 12 of them have already shut the door in prohibiting foreign government electioneering, including our neighboring state of New Hampshire. So this is something that other states are dealing with and have closed the door, but perhaps Congressman Golden has further perspective.
Well, Danielle, I don't have any specifics. And by the way, first, let me just say thank you to all of you for inviting me to be here with you. And in particular, I'm really pleased to be with Senator Rick Bennett from my home state and from my congressional district specifically. And it's been great working with him on this issue and some others. And I look forward to continuing to do that. He's just a class act. And as you have all the evidence of here today, someone who's really focused on finding solutions to serious problems, regardless of politics, so to speak, or any kind of partisanship. Just a great representative for the people of Western Maine, and on this issue in particular, a real leader. And I don't have any statistics for you, like I said to begin with. But what I will tell you is it is definitely a problem in other states because my colleagues in Congress talk to each other about it. There are other examples similar to what we've seen recently here in Maine that have been shared with me by some of my colleagues. And last fall, when the FEC issued the ruling that Senator Bennett brought up, it was actually Representative Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania, a Republican who's in the Problem Solvers Caucus with me, a former member of the FBI, and someone that I frequently work across the aisle with, who said, we got to change this. If the FEC thinks there's a lack of clarity about whether or not federal law should apply to these referendum, Congress should make clear our intent that federal law cover these ballot initiatives and to close this loophole. So we've introduced the Stop Foreign Funds in Elections Act, which would simply take the ban on foreign nationals and entities from contributing directly to candidates for office and extend it to ballot referendum and initiatives. We would love to get that done at the federal level. In the absence of our taking action on that front, people like Senator Bennett around the country who are working to close these loopholes state by state are really your backstop, and it's very important.
Yeah, interesting. I'm encouraged that there's bipartisan support for this, and I'm interested how much where are you seeing dividing lines on this issue? How robust is that support on both sides? Is there is there hope of getting some strong legislation on this issue, either federally, or is the kind of, is it ballot initiatives that are going to be the best path in putting in front of the people? Senator Bennett, would love your thoughts.
Sure. Well, we haven't got a lot of numbers on this, but I can tell you that one poll I did see in Maine regarding foreign spending in elections, is 80+% opposed for, it's just a natural point of view, I think. And I think it's shared across all people of all political persuasions. Our elections are for citizens, and foreign governments are the farthest thing from a citizen. I mean, George Washington warned about this back when he was president of the United States. This is not like a new problem. What is new is the extent of the problem, the amount of money involved, and the mechanisms by which foreign governments can involve themselves, which can be a little subterranean through social media, spending through AstroTurf organizations, fake grassroots organizations. We've seen, unhappily, for example, in Maine, the State Chamber of Commerce receiving money from foreign governments and foreign corporations that they then turn into political influence. So I think, though, to answer your question, the support is across the board, and I think that the largest opposition comes from the people that don't want to close the loophole, who are, the beneficiaries of the current openness of this, and so we are finding it very easy when we get in front of somebody with a petition asking for a signature. Everybody signs it. the challenge we have is just doing that, getting out, and particularly as we've experienced with the hopefully retreating pandemic, just the physicality of getting signatures around so that people can get them signed. But the opposition is very thin to this.
Yeah, I would think what I would say at the federal level is that when you see some like a specific problem arise that's easily identifiable and so strongly supported by the American people, which Senator Bennett talks about, I think that yes, the answer is we can find a way to get something done. I think the FEC ruling surprised a lot of people in Congress. Where I see there being a danger that what is a bipartisan issue could break down is if well-intentioned, but people who are also committed to getting money out of politics across the board in other ways try to expand the legislation beyond a narrow, strong focus on getting foreign money out of our politics. Now, I personally am very supportive of many different bills out there to get big money out of politics and reduce the amount of spending that we see overwhelming voters and the voices of the people of Maine, the way David Trahan talked about in that quote. But I think if we want to keep it bipartisan and at the federal level be able to pass something specific to foreign money in referendum and initiatives, we just got to stay focused on that single issue. And I think the referendum that Senator Bennett is doing is taking a similar approach. I think he and I are both proponents of addressing things like Citizens United, cracking down on what we call dark money. As an example, I've introduced a bill called the Crackdown on Dark Money Act, which would require all 501c4s who engage in political spending to disclose their donors. They don't have to right now. Some people oppose that, including a lot of nonprofits out there who are doing that spending. Or they may say, that's only accounts for 10% of our annual spending. But, I think should be the cost of engaging in the political process with money. If you're going to spend money to influence elections, you should have to disclose who your donors are, the same as any candidate running for office. It's about transparency at the end of the day. Another thing that can get a little more controversial, I am a co-sponsor of the Get Foreign Money Out of U.S. Election Act. And this one starts to kind of talk about, what is foreign influence in the context of a corporation? Is it if 30% of your shareholders are foreign nationals? Is it if it's 50%, 51%? Is it 60%? Where is the threshold by which we might start to think of a corporate donor, even if it is an American company, as foreign influenced or perhaps even foreign owned? And sometimes there's disagreement about these details about where to find the right standard. So, our bill would, I think, more clearly define foreign influence in a corporation. And some people may say, hey, Citizens United was a Supreme Court ruling that said that corporations can spend in elections. I wish they hadn't reached that consideration, and I support the resolution that would change that. But in regards to getting foreign money out of referendum and initiatives, a lot of room for bipartisanship. I think we got to keep a narrow focus in this instance.
That makes sense. So, I think it's fair to say that it sounds like there may be a window of opportunity both in Maine and in Congress to have a fairly narrow legislation come forward on this. Is that fair to say? Are you both hopeful that we can actually see, at least in a narrow sense, some action on this in the coming year?
You never know with Congress. It's, some things that make all the sense.
I know. I shouldn't ask you that. It's not fair. It's not fair.
When 80% of the American people say, yes, we should block foreign money from being spent in our elections, you would think Congress would act quickly. And I agree with the senator. I mean, this has been at the heart of our democracy since the very beginning. Go read the Federalist Papers and the fears that our founders had and early leaders had about foreign influence in our domestic affairs and in our politics. So it's a no-brainer I'm very hopeful we'll do something. We'll probably would have to find a way to put it into some kind of moving vehicle, like maybe, I don't know, the National Defense Act. But in regards to the initiative, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Bennett. I'm very hopeful that they're going to be successful. I really think that they get this done. They know what they're doing. The people involved in this, I think, have done this before. And they've clearly got the people of Maine behind them. They just need to get on the ballot, some of the nuts and bolts, and they need some help doing that and making sure that they're resourced appropriately to go out and make their case to the people of Maine.
Yeah, if I may weigh in on this, Danielle, thank you, Congressman. You began to get into some of the details of the question, and the devil is in the details on any piece of legislation, and this referendum that we have is a piece of statute that we are proposing. So you do have to make picks about what does constitute a foreign government controlled entity, for example. We set in our legislation, in this referendum, we've set the bar very low. We think that if, say, a company is 5% owned by the Chinese government, the Chinese government is controlling that company. So we've set the limit in this proposal at 5% of foreign government ownership, because we would rather err on the side of that than opening yet another loophole. You can close one and open another. So the principle is important. The details are also important. I would also say that, one of the reasons that we've kind of constrained the referendum is because of Citizens United. They're under federal law and case law, as well as statute. We can only go so far in controlling money. And so with this proposal, we focus, as the Congressman said, on the foreign government angle. But let me get it. I'll just run through the details of the bill a little bit, or the proposal, because it's important. One is, as I said, we'll eliminate campaign spending by foreign governments in all Maine elections. Referendum campaigns are already illegal in candidate elections. We will require media companies, who are the beneficiaries of most of the spending, the TV stations, radio stations, to disclose illegal spending by foreign governments. So we're putting a bit of a burden on the people who are benefiting from the expenditure directly to make sure the money's coming from a clean source. We also, because there's ways of involving yourself without what is technically called electioneering, which is getting involved. You can also just run an ad, and we saw that too in the referendum campaign, where Hydro-Quebec, in that particular case, was running issue ads, which may not have been directly related to asking for a vote, but is essentially part of their strategy. So what, on that phrase, we're mandating disclosure by foreign governments on issue advertisements. In other words, we just want you to tell us who you are, who are putting these issue advertisements out. And finally, because of the importance of the bigger issue, we have put in our proposal some language that reaffirms Maine's already stated support for an anti-corruption amendment to the U.S. Constitution, actually the overturning of Citizens United. It's not law, but back in, I think it was 2013, a previous legislature actually voted on a very bipartisan basis on a joint resolution to ask Congressman Golden and his colleagues from Maine to support an overturning of Citizens United, and to reaffirm, quote, the power of citizens through their government to regulate the raising and spending of money in elections. We have taken that, which was passed by the legislature, and we've put it in this referendum. It doesn't have the power of law, but when the referendum passes, there will be clear statement by the people of Maine, not just their elected representatives in the legislature, but by the people, that we need to deal with the bigger question, and the 28th Amendment to the Constitution is really the only way that you can really get at that. And so we hope to make a statement on that question as well through this referendum.
Yeah, and I'm excited to have, be in receipt of that, and I have no doubt that it will pass. I'm a big advocate of revisiting Citizens United and doing something about it. I hear this all the time from my constituents. I know Rick does too. It's something along the lines of, we feel like the conversation that's being driven by big money in our elections is absent of anything that we are really concerned about, here in Maine on a day-to-day basis. People are being left feeling like, folks in Washington, folks in Augusta must really not be listening to us. They can't hear us, or they just don't care, because the political debate just doesn't match up with the things that my constituents would really like me to be focused on. And so, all this money distorts the debate to begin with and leaves people feeling unheard or left out completely, which is not what our campaign apparatus is really all about. It's supposed to be about direct engagement for constituents to be able to be involved in choosing their representatives at all levels. But it's just a big problem across the board, money, in big money in general, but I talked a little bit about dark money. Here's a few other foreign related money bills that I'm also a sponsor of, and I think Rick would support. A bill called the Block Foreign Funded Political Ads Act. This one has to do with Facebook. No accountability, a lot of disinformation being pushed from countries, from malign actors in places like Russia, who are trying to influence our political debate. We don't know where the source of those ads are. We're trying to get Facebook to track the source of that payment before they put the ad up to make sure that it's not being funded by a foreign government or a foreign entity. We know that they are capable of doing that. We need to make them do it. The Stop Foreign Payoffs Act. This one I'm really passionate about. It would prohibit government officials and their family members from holding foreign financial interests, and would require divestiture of any interest in a prescribed manner and time frame as soon as you're elected. We're not trying to prevent people from holding those types of financial assets when they're not serving in public office, but while they are, we feel like members of Congress and their family members should not be holding financial interest in foreign entities. We think that's really important. And lastly, another bill I'm working on to prevent cabinet members or former high-level military officers from leaving their post to then take a job working for a foreign entity, lobbying the United States government. That's a problem we've also seen. And it's just an example of the many different ways that foreign money can find its way back into trying to influence our elections and our government.
Really interesting. And, I think the national security lens, that's placing the national security lens, is really interesting and timely, needless to say, given the broad scale we have of disinformation influencing the political dialogue on many issues domestically, Ukraine and in the Ukraine and everything else. So let me there's a question in the chat that I think is relevant here. I understand, I think, your point from both of you is to take this on right now. You're starting with some very specific bills, specific legislation, but that you're also both supportive of a broader approach ultimately to look at Citizens United. So Scott Calvin has asked a question, which is, is the problem that you see just that it was a non-American company spending here, and if it was a U.S. company, would that ultimately, would you see that as less problematic? It's a little bit of a trick question, but I'll put it. You can caveat as you like, but I'll put it out there.
Thank you, Dana. I think this goes right to the heart of the complexities of the question today, when you have so much economic interest involved in our elections, and government is, in my view, increasingly captured by large corporate interests, and so their interests in getting involved in elections are keener than ever. We live in a globalized world, and so these questions have to be visited. And we'll each come to our conclusions individually about where the line should be. Just to be clear again, Hydro-Quebec is not only a Canadian company, it is 100% owned by a foreign government. Okay, so it's not just a bunch of Canadian investors that own Hydro-Quebec. In fact, we have one of the two of our investor-owned utilities in Maine who are increasingly involved in governmental action and regulatory issues, is that covers a vast part of rural Maine, is actually owned by the government of Calgary, Canada. So, the question is, personally, I think the line clearly is with foreign governments, or a government-controlled entity. That is ripe for mischief of all sorts and just wrong in the face of it. In the governor's veto message on my bill that preceded the question that we're putting to the voters, she listed 5 companies that are Maine companies, or working in Maine and employing Mainers. And she said, these companies shouldn't be muzzled from their speech in Maine elections. I called up all 5 companies and I asked them, well, do you have any foreign government ownership? And not a single one of them did. I mean, she was just misinformed on the facts that these companies would have been swept up in this legislation. So, as I said, the bill before us, the proposal that we're collecting signatures for, is focused on foreign government-controlled entities, not foreign companies. I mean, I personally think the line should be pretty tight, that we, corporate spending by itself is rife in politics. I'd like to see that squeezed down as much as possible under current law. And certainly we should close the loophole on foreign government controlled entities.
Yeah, I guess I would say that I think it's all problematic. That being said, there's a hard red line out there for me on foreign government, foreign national involvement in our politics, full stop. And when you're looking at what Rick is trying to address here, the utility, people rely on energy. They have to be able to afford it. They need it to be delivered reliably. They need to know that the investment in that energy's infrastructure is being made so that they can depend on it, whether they are individuals, citizens, or businesses. And there's just something about foreign ownership of some critical resources, like our utilities, like our resources, like our forests or our waters, whatever it may be, that is very concerning. And when those foreign governments or foreign entities can then spend money in our elections to influence political decisions, government decisions, it's something that I think we should all be alarmed about. So I have a hard red line against foreign involvement in our politics at all. When it comes to if it were let's say an American company spending in politics, I don't think they should be either. That being said, Rick pointed out Citizens United, laid down a different marker, and it would take a constitutional amendment to address that, which I am supportive of. I think that, yes, if you can say that money is speech, but so is the amount of money to a degree. When corporations have so much more than individuals, and when the laws are set up differently, where they can funnel massive amounts of money into 501c4s, and you don't even know, who the source of the money is. But Rick here, could only give me what, $2,800 in my election. He's capped. It's just playing by these different rules is a big part of the problem. But in general, I'd like all corporate money out of politics. If we can't do that, we definitely got to keep all foreign money out of politics.
Yeah, well, I'm interested. Senator Bennett, you mentioned the Chamber of Commerce locally on this issue, and I would say often we see there's pretty good relationships with chambers and state houses and Republicans in state houses and other, usually there's a dialogue that happens with the chamber and local political leaders. And I'm interested, we work with chambers in different nationally and in different cities, and they vary a lot on different issues related to democracy. And just curious if you think there was a path to get business in the form of chambers or otherwise locally more on board.
It's a great question, Danielle, and I would welcome that. In fact, my local chamber here, Oxford Hills Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Bridgeton Chamber of Commerce, the local ones are, they're in tune with all business people trying to make a go of it. They're often competing against these mega corporations, transnational mega corporations that too often are getting involved at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce or the state chambers of commerce. And I think there's a growing unease among business interests, particularly small business versus these larger businesses, and part of that is who is pressuring the levers of power in Washington and the state capitals. And so I would like to see more accountability of the spending that's going into these issue advocacy groups like chambers of commerce when they're actively involved in pushing agendas and creating groups like they did in the referendum I referenced. They create the Mainers for whatever, and Maine people to help puppies or whatever they might be, in order to and then they're funded by who knows where, Hydro-Quebec, Iberdrola, some big global company, and they're doing issue ads and holding press conferences and all of these sorts of things. I mean, it's the right of people to speak out, but it would be nice to know exactly who they are really representing and where the money's coming from. By the way, I don't mean to jump ahead, but I just caught my eye that somebody had asked the question about, are we, Americans presumably, trying to influence foreign elections? I just have to tell you, and overtly or covertly, I don't know about the covert, but it's interesting that on my bill I referenced when we, the CEO of Hydro-Quebec actually came and testified against my bill to close their loophole they have to spend in Maine elections. And the question was put to her, well, what's the rule in Canada? And she said, well, we ban any foreign nationals from being in our elections. But she said that their elections are very important and politically charged, and so that's the reason.
Wow, that's a good clip. We should have a clip of that. Well, look, I think it's Warren had a question that I think is, comes to some of the core of this around the constitutional amendment, and which I know you both support, and why is it just so hard to get progress? I mean, there's progress, and American Promise has obviously been working on making progress towards a constitutional amendment, but given the widespread support of Americans of restricting campaign finance, what do you think the path is to getting us there towards an amendment? Maybe.
I think I'll just say briefly, and then let Congressman Golden address this. I mean, there's two paths to a constitutional amendment. The one that American Promise is working toward diligently and very methodically, and I give them, and Jeff Clements and the whole team there, just tremendous accolades for the hard work that's involved with building support for any sort of constitutional amendment. There aren't many of them. This is going to be the 28th, and the first 10 were the Bill of Rights. So there've been 18 since then. This is a big deal, and the path that they're pursuing is to get Congress on a 2/3 vote to adopt a proposal that would then go to all the states for ratification. The other path is an Article 5 convention under the Constitution, which allows states to individually call for 2/3 of the states to call for a constitutional convention that would be prescribed for the topic at hand. That one is more difficult, I think. Well, it depends. I won't handicap the two processes, but I think that it basically, Congressman Golden and his colleagues, 2/3 of them need to agree to a proposal to get ratified. It's hard work.
Yes, one thing, I saw someone commented this, they said that the obstruction to doing this was the Republican Party. And while I agree that there are people in the Republican Party's leadership ranks, in particular nationally, who don't want to ban big money or crack down on it all, I think the same can also be said of Democrats in national leadership positions as well. Both parties are awash in these types of money, and I mean, you look at the super PACs that some of them operate. The way that money gets directed into 501c4s, etc. It's a big problem in both parties, and I think accountability starts with your own party and not just blaming the other party. And so voters have to remember that when it comes to money in politics, it's a bipartisan problem, and it needs to be a bipartisan solution. And it begins with voters paying attention to their representative. There are things you can do as an individual, even if Citizens United is currently the law of the land. I don't take corporate money. I've made that pledge, and I don't, I don't take corporate contributions. Some of my colleagues do. I just don't think it's worth it. And in particular, because I believe that we should overturn Citizens United, I just find it easier to say, I will lead by example. Voters should, if you feel passionately about this, insist on that from your own representatives or candidates for office. Ask them what their position is, and then ask them to walk the walk. But what we need to do is elect more people who want to go to Congress, who are willing to stand up to party leadership when they get there, to say, this is important for America's democracy. It's important to my constituents, and I'd rather stand with them than with you on this issue, and push for that vote. That is the only way we would ever get a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. You got to elect the right people.
Yeah, super. That sounds right. And I know we have two of those people on the phone, which I'm thankful for. One thing I've wondered is, to your point, that both parties are now relying on large outside dollars in general. We looked at the data, since 2012 as well, in terms of overall spending in politics, and something that you saw kind of 2017 in the 2016 election is that there was more dark money on the Republican side, but by 2020 it was equal or even slightly higher on the Democratic side. And so in kind of nuclear warfare terms, we're kind of heading towards mutually assured destruction here, because it can just keep going, right? You can go from 15 billion to 150 billion, and it doesn't improve our outcomes in the system. So I'm wondering if that dynamic creates any potential for a negotiated solution, because both sides are sufficiently armed to play this endlessly. Have either of you seen any movement as a result of the kind of fact that money is actually pretty equal on both sides at this point?
Well, Dwight Eisenhower warned of a military industrial complex back in the 1950s. I think right now we have a political industrial complex, which we have so much money in the system that the money is the people who are benefiting from the money don't want to see it stopped. And I agree with Congressman Golden's statement about when you start thinking about this as a partisan issue, be careful, because there are a lot of smart people in politics making lots of money to make everything tribal, so that it's the Democrats versus the Republican. It's this interest versus that interest. And, for the most part, these people don't want to solve problems. They want to keep the contest going so that the money streams that are funding their initiatives keep going, rather than solving the actual problems that people have. And this is a classic here. There's a lot of people, political consultants, polling firms, the news media, not the news media, but the people that fund the news media, which is advertising dollars. There's so much money that we've an ecosystem, a very powerful ecosystem dependent on those flows of money. So breaking that apart is tough to do where we are now.
Yeah, very difficult. One thing I want to point out before we stop is, speaking of a political industrial complex, is, I think a lot of people think that when like Rick and I talk about the corrupting influence of money in politics, or foreign money in our politics, they imagine people being individually corrupted, like bought, like there's an exchange of money, this for that. That's not the case. I would say 99% of the time, there are those individuals. And when they get caught, we ought to throw the book at them and run them right out of office for good. But more often, it's a softer kind of influence that is concerning. And it's why we have to get to the heart of the problem, getting the foreign money out and, hopefully cracking down on sources of dark money and, big spending overall. Here's an example. I can remember introducing a bill in my first months in Congress in 2019 and having a person unnamed who'd been in Washington for a long time say, geez, you really shouldn't introduce that bill. It's going to make the pharmaceutical companies angry and they will spend millions of dollars to come after you and get you out of office. It was the fear that they felt of big money being spent against them that was going to prevent them from picking a fight that needs to be picked, because Americans are paying too much for their prescription drugs. We all know that is the case, but they wield a very big, heavy war chest. There is, granted, I'll be honest, sticking up for my constituents. There is a paper mill in northern Maine that prints the labels that you get in your bag when you buy prescription medications. Big important jobs for folks in Madawaska, Maine. The pharmaceutical companies don't want to print those labels anymore. It's cost them pennies, but they're looking for every savings they can find to send back to their shareholders, in my opinion. And they'd like to crush those jobs. So I have been working with my colleagues in the Maine delegation to block that change from taking place, ensuring that individual consumers will continue to get their medication information printed and provided to them along with their medications, rather than having to go and search for it online. Again, people were like, geez, Jared, you're really making the pharmaceuticals angry. They started coming after me with advertisements in Maine through like a 501c setup, where they made themselves sound like this nice organization fighting for consumers. If you followed the money back, you see that it's all pharmaceuticals. And we're saying that I was in the pockets of the forest products industry. Now, what I did was I wrote an op-ed in the local newspaper and just said, I want to thank the pharmaceutical companies for pointing out that I'm advocating for my constituents, the people of Maine. We rely on the forest products industry, and I'm all about protecting jobs. But nevertheless, my point is that that is the most corrupting, influence that's out there, is the fear that if you do the right thing from a policy perspective, someone's going to set up a 501c or super PAC, and they're going to spend millions of dollars. And as Rick has repeatedly pointed out, sometimes we don't even know where that money comes from, and much of it could be foreign owned.
Okay, first, I want to thank both of you. I'm going to hand it back to Jeff in a moment. I think your leadership on these issues is so important and really thoughtful and action oriented. One thing I did want to share is that when we've looked at this issue from a perspective of ESG and both investors and companies, there's increasing movement towards transparency of political spend as something that boards should have oversight of, that investors should be able to have oversight of. And the reality is there's also a fair number of companies out there who would prefer not to participate in that system. And then all of a sudden, with this kind of mutually assured destruction, they have to participate. So I do have some hope that there is an alliance of some segments of the business community, investor community who actually would see the benefit of actually restricting money as opposed to participating in kind of an endless a system that's going to endlessly increase in both dollars to put in and frankly disinformation that those dollars are advancing. I'll put in the chat, we just released a report on ESG and corporate political spending that looks at what data and companies and investors should be looking at to really understand where money is going in their companies. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Jeff Clements to finish us off. And
Daniela, can I just say one thing, maybe two things really quickly.
Yeah.
One, billionaire spending is also a problem. We didn't really touch on that too much, but it's an issue. I'd like to see a sort of billionaires club like Warren Buffett set up for giving away wealth, where people take a pledge. But more immediately, I just wanted to say, I'm really thankful for Congressman Golden's leadership here, and it's been a joy working with him. I know he's a true believer, and he's been a great partner on this, and I'm just very grateful for that level of interest that he's given on this. And
I got to throw that right back out to Senator Bennett. Hey, if you're discouraged and you think people can't work together across the political aisle, here's an example of two people doing it right here in Maine. Rick was chair of the Maine GOP not too long ago, right? I got that correct. And he's more than happy to work across the aisle in Augusta and doing great work on this and other issues. By the way, great remarks about the tribes that I watched. And I wanted to quickly say thank you for that. But I love what he's doing in this initiative. Really important. I hope everyone watching will support it and make sure that they get on the ballot. And then hopefully, I have very little doubt that once they're on the ballot, the people of Maine will support it.
we do need your financial help to get on the ballot. So protectmaineelections.com.
And let me say something about that. I want to join you and also say thank you to Daniela for leading this and moderating this wonderful conversation and all the great work at Leadership Now. So important. Congressman Golden, Senator Bennett, thank you so much. There's a lot in the chat saying that you are giving people a lot of hope. And one saying, where have you been hiding? And I want to emphasize they have not been hiding. Maybe we have been hiding too much because they are in the trenches really working hard. So I would say take this as a call for all of us to join them. We are at American Promise are actually seeing these kind of conversations happening all over the country. Republicans are there already. So don't, as Congressman Golden said, you can point fingers at the Democrats just as easily, or we can get in the game and have more of this kind of cross-partisan solutions. We'll get the constitutional amendment and we'll get Protect Maine Elections. And a couple of things on my screen again to close this. If you do want to, AmericanPromise.net on the constitutional amendment. Everywhere in the country, we're leading this. We do need your help. And we help states like Maine lead this fight. And these two great public servants do their work. ProtectMaineElections.com. Donations will help get signatures. If you're in Maine and you want to help, Chris Kayer is our field manager with American Promise and field director of the Maine campaign. And he's on the call. But just sign up, you'll get right to work. And if you can't get to work gathering signatures for this ballot initiative, chip in. And if you want a conversation with Rick about it and join those of us who are investing in this, just let me know, jeffc@americanpromise.net. I'll be happy to facilitate a conversation with Senator Rick Bennett and the campaign about how you can help. So Daniela, Congressman Golden, Senator Bennett, and all of Leadership Now, Warren and Patrick, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.